This is not a misunderstanding. This is not diplomatic noise. This is a policy failure happening in real time. Donald Trump stood in front of a microphone and said Canada does not matter, that trade with Canada does not matter, that Canadian-made cars do not matter. And at that exact moment, Canada was standing in Beijing, doing something far more dangerous for the United States than any speech. Canada was proving it has options. While Trump dismissed his closest ally, Canada's industry minister was on Chinese soil, openly warning global markets about instability coming from the United States, not from Europe, not from Asia, from south of Canada's border, from Washington, from Trump. That contrast was not accidental, it was deliberate, because power is not about who shouts the loudest. Power is about who can walk away. Here is the number Washington should be afraid of: $50 billion. That is how much China had already invested in Canada by 2024. China is now Canada's second largest export market, and Trump is treating that country like it has nowhere else to go. This is not brinksmanship. This is not negotiation. This is the United States shooting itself in the foot during an economic war it no longer controls. The question is no longer why Canada is pivoting. The real question is this: why did the United States hand Canada the incentive to leave? Because while Trump was declaring Canada irrelevant, Canada was quietly building a future where the United States is optional. And once that happens, leverage collapses. Pause here, because the economic reality behind this shift is far more brutal than Washington is willing to admit. To understand why this moment matters, you have to strip away the politics and look at the mechanics of the economy. Canada is not a peripheral supplier. Canada is a systemic input. Start with energy. Roughly 60% of crude oil imported by the United States comes from Canada, not overseas, not by tanker, by pipeline, cheap, predictable, integrated. There is no fast substitute for that. Now, agriculture. More than 90% of potash used by United States farmers comes from Canada. Potash is not optional. It is fertilizer. No fertilizer means lower yields. Lower yields mean higher food prices. This is not theory, this is math. Manufacturing tells an even harsher story. The North American auto industry runs on just-in-time supply chains. Engines cross the border multiple times. Transmissions cross the border multiple times. A single tariff delay does not cause inconvenience, it causes shutdowns. A 15% cost increase at the border does not stay at the border. It multiplies, because marginal cost matters, because inventory buffers are thin, because factories are optimized for speed, not resilience. Now look at labor. Canadians' auto sector employs 125,000 direct workers. When you include parts, logistics, steel, and services, that number jumps to 400,000 jobs tied directly to continental auto integration. Trump's rhetoric assumes those jobs are trapped. They are not.
Capital follows certainty. Markets price stability. And this is where Washington miscalculates. Canada is Canada's second largest export market. Canada is Canada's third largest investor. That relationship did not appear overnight. It deepened quietly while the United States focused on threats instead of strategy. When Canada's foreign minister stood in Beijing and talked about unpredictability south of our border, investors heard something very specific. The United States is no longer a reliable anchor. In global markets, perception becomes cost. Cost becomes relocation. Relocation becomes permanent. This is why 8 memorandums of understanding signed in one day matters. Energy cooperation, forestry, food safety, industrial standards. These are not photo opportunities. These are supply chain foundations. Trump believes leverage comes from dependence, but dependence only works if there are no alternatives. Canada is now demonstrating in full view of global capital that alternatives exist. And once supply chains begin to rewire, they do not snap back. This is the economic reality Washington is refusing to confront. And it sets the stage for something far worse. Because the damage is not happening to Canada first, it is happening inside the United States. This is where the story turns from strategy to self-inflicted damage. Trump's posture assumes pain flows north. In reality, the pain detonates at home. Start with the auto corridor: Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, New York. These states do not import Canadian cars. They import components that keep American factories alive. When tariffs or threats disrupt cross-border flow, assembly lines do not adapt, they stop. A single delayed shipment of engines does not reduce output. It shuts down shifts. It sends workers home. It triggers layoffs that ripple outward in hours, not weeks. Industry associations have been warning about this for years. An internal memo circulated by a major United States auto suppliers group put it bluntly: border instability increases unit cost faster than any wage negotiation ever could. Translation: tariffs hurt workers faster than unions ever will. Now look east. Maine depends on Canadian electricity imports to stabilize winter demand. New York relies on cross-border hydropower to prevent price spikes during peak load. Energy markets do not care about nationalism. They care about electrons arriving on time. Threats at the border translate directly into higher utility bills. That cost does not hit corporations first. It hits households. Florida feels it differently. Canadian aluminum feeds American construction and packaging. Price volatility feeds directly into housing costs and consumer goods. When marginal input costs rise by 5%, final prices rise far more. That is not inflation theory. That is supply chain arithmetic. Now, agriculture. American farmers already operate on thin margins. Potash prices spike, yields fall, food prices climb. The United States Farm Bureau has repeatedly warned that fertilizer insecurity poses a direct risk to food affordability. But Washington keeps pretending this is leverage. Here is the cruel irony. Canada is not collapsing under pressure. Canada is hedging. United States firms, meanwhile, cannot hedge geography. Factories cannot teleport. Farmers cannot wait out seasons. Utilities cannot invent power sources overnight. Trump's approach turns reliability into risk, and markets punish risk mercilessly. You see it in delayed capital spending. You see it in higher insurance premiums. You see it in contracts rewritten with exit clauses. The most damaging effect is not the tariff itself, it is the signal that the United States is governed by impulse, the signal that policy can swing overnight, the signal that long-term planning is unsafe. Canada understood this signal instantly. That is why its ministers did not whisper concerns in private. They stated them openly on foreign soil for investors to hear. This is what a backfire looks like. Trump wanted fear. He created doubt. And doubt is far more corrosive, because while fear can be managed, doubt forces exit. Which brings us to the most dangerous part of this story: what Canada is building behind Washington's back. While Washington is shouting, Ottawa is building. Quietly, deliberately, irreversibly. This is the part most Americans are not seeing. Canada is no longer organizing its economy around access to the United States. It is organizing its economy around optionality. Start with infrastructure.
Rail capacity linking Western Canada to Pacific ports has been expanding for years. Port of Prince Rupert, Port of Vancouver. These are not symbolic upgrades. They're designed to move energy, minerals, grain, and manufactured goods directly to Asia without touching United States territory. That matters, because every container that leaves Canada westbound is one that no longer needs permission from Washington. Now look at diplomacy. Canada is not choosing China over the United States. That framing is lazy. What Canada is doing is diversifying leverage. 8 memorandums of understanding signed in Beijing on day one were not ceremonial. Energy cooperation, forestry and advanced wood construction, food safety, crime prevention, tourism, cultural exchange. These are long-term anchors. China does not move this quickly unless it sees durability. It does not invest unless it sees reliability. And it does not build supply chains around partners governed by impulse. Now add Europe. Canada has been quietly deepening industrial coordination with Germany, with France, with South Korea. Battery supply chains, electric vehicle components, advanced manufacturing. This is not about headlines. This is about reducing exposure. And then there is the issue that terrifies Washington the most: electric vehicles. Canada is openly preparing the ground for Chinese electric vehicle manufacturing in Ontario, not just imports, production. If Chinese electric vehicles are built in Canada, they sit directly on the United States border. Cheaper, competitive, technologically advanced. Exactly what Trump has been trying to block. But tariffs lose power when production relocates. Canada's auto sector already employs 125,000 direct workers. With supply chains, that rises to 400,000 jobs. Ottawa is signaling to global capital: bring the factories here, bring the jobs here, bring the technology here. And Washington's threats make that pitch stronger, not weaker. Mexico understands this too. As the United States weaponizes trade unpredictably, North American partners are learning the same lesson. Dependency is a liability. So they hedge, they build sideways, they lock in alternatives.
This is the part Trump fundamentally misunderstands. Canada is not reacting emotionally. It is responding strategically. A country with options negotiates calmly. A country with options does not panic. A country with options does not fear threats. And once those options exist, they do not disappear. Which brings us to the most dangerous consequence of all: the geopolitical shift that follows. The most destructive consequence of this moment is not economic, it is psychological, because trust, once broken, does not reset with an election. For decades, the United States benefited from one assumption: reliability. Allies believed Washington might be tough, but it was predictable. That belief anchored investment, diplomacy, and long-term planning. Trump shattered that assumption, not quietly, not subtly, publicly. When Canada's foreign minister stood in Beijing and spoke about instability south of our border, that message was not aimed at voters. It was aimed at capital. Global investors understood immediately. The United States can no longer be modeled as a stable variable, and markets hate unstable variables. This is why, even if Trump leaves office, the damage persists. Supply chains do not reverse easily. Factories do not relocate twice. Trust does not return on command. Once Canada builds rail, ports, and partnerships that bypass the United States, those pathways remain. Once Europe and Asia deepen direct ties with Ottawa, Washington's deep-keeper role erodes. That is the irreversible part. And this is where geopolitics shifts. China benefits immediately, not because Canada is choosing sides, but because China offers what the United States currently does not: consistency. Russia watches closely as well. Every fracture inside the Western alliance reduces coordinated leverage. Every ally hedging weakens sanction regimes. Every diversification erodes collective pressure. This is not about ideology, it is about system design. The United States built a world where partners accepted asymmetry because stability compensated for it. Trump removed the compensation. Now partners rebalance. Canada is not alone in this calculation. Europe is doing the same. Asia is doing the same. Even long-standing allies are pricing in Washington risk. And here is the most uncomfortable truth. Leverage works only once. The first time, fear works. The second time, preparation begins. The third time, leverage evaporates. Canada is now in phase 3. Trump can still threaten, he can still posture, but the audience has changed. Markets are no longer listening, they are moving. And power, once it starts moving away, rarely returns quietly. Which leaves one final question. What does this mean for the future of cooperation itself? Power is not the ability to intimidate. Power is the ability to be necessary. For decades, the United States confused dominance with indispensability. Trump turned that confusion into doctrine, and in doing so, he taught allies a lesson they will never unlearn. Dependence is dangerous. Options are safety. Canada did not abandon the United States, it outgrew vulnerability. What we are witnessing is not a pivot toward China, it is a pivot away from being trapped. Once a country proves it can survive without your approval, your threats lose weight. Once markets believe alternatives exist, leverage collapses. That is the moment unfolding right now. The United States can still choose cooperation, it can still choose predictability, but it can no longer assume loyalty, because loyalty without stability is irrational. So here is the question that will define the next decade. Did Trump merely anger allies, or did he permanently teach them how to live without the United States? Drop your answer in the comments, because once trust leaves the room, it does not come back quietly. And this time, the door may already be closed.